Okay. So welcome everyone to what are we called? The Pleasures of the Text podcast. Welcome everyone to the Pleasure of the Text podcast. I am your host, Shannon, and we have
Gareth. Hello.
And we're just two friends obsessed with books and writing, and we're here to share that imaginative space where readers and writers make meaning together. So today it's our chat with Gareth and Shannon segment, and today we are talking about what can you achieve in 48 hours, especially in terms of your writing. And we have a few really exciting examples. Did you want to kick us off, Gareth?
Yeah, I can kick us off. Should we talk about ourselves first, or should we talk more generally? What would you prefer?
Well, if you want, I can say where the idea came from.
Actually, yeah, I don't even know where the idea came from, so that would be great.
Okay, so I was doing some research on different types of podcasts around reading and writing, and one caught my eye and it's called The Portfolio of Life, and I will put it in the show notes. But unfortunately, they had their grand finale podcast episode in March this year. So I'm sure you guys can go check it out anyway. But they were talking about how to get paid to pursue your passion in 48 hours or less. And one of the guys on the podcast called Andy, he basically just started a coffee bean roasting business within 48 hours, and he literally sold a product. Now, that's completely different to writing, but the question then arose for me, what can I achieve with my writing in 48 hours? And, why 48 hours? It's the weekend, and we have 52 weekends in a year.
Now that all makes sense. That sounds good. Okay, so I guess my question for you would be, what can you achieve in 48 hours, Shannon?
Well, I personally have written a short story in 48 hours before. I can consume a considerable amount of coffee in 48 hours. And I did check with the FDA this morning to see how many cups of coffee you should drink in 48 hours. And they recommended 4 to 5 cups. Have you done more than 4 to 5 cups a day for 48 hours?
Yeah, oh my goodness. Yeah, far more. I think I used to average about 12 cups a day. This was black coffee and I was younger and more virile, so I could manage it back then. And of course that was a time when it was like appropriate and polite to chain smoke in your house. So I had that all going.
So smoking and drinking coffee.
Yeah, smoking and drinking coffee.
Did you consume food in between those sessions at all?
Not a lot, no, not a lot.
Gosh.
But at least I wasn't doing a Hemingway and having absinthe before my sessions. He's a fascinating fellow, actually. I was reading an interview with him. George Plimpton is also quite a notable person. Interviewed Hemingway in the Paris Review in 1958.
Okay.
And basically he was tracking his writing process. And it was quite interesting. I'll read you a tiny quote. Quote, he keeps track of his daily progress so as not to kid myself on a large chart made out of the side of a cardboard packing case and set up against the wall under the nose of a mounted gazelle head. The numbers on the chart showing the daily output of words differ from 450, 575, 462, 1250 to 512. The higher figures on days Hemingway puts in extra work so he won't feel guilty spending the following day fishing on the Gulf Stream. So he was about, I guess on average, a 500 words a day writer. And he also did some fascinating things. Like he actually worked at a standing desk long before these things were fashionable.
Hemingway did?
He did all through his career. He would basically place everything up around chest height, and he would handwrite and he would typewrite depending on how it was going. He found dialogue easy, so he would often just typewrite that straight out of his head, but he did a lot of stuff by hand with a pencil. And yeah, he had a proper desk, like a sit down, have a snooze desk. But that was just covered in letters and junk and hunting trophies and boxing gloves and bottles of absinthe and all the things that Hemingway was known for. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I suppose in terms of the coffee, if you were going to write for 48 hours, you'd have the issue of maintaining mental focus. That would be a significant issue.
There is actually a competition, not a competition, it is a challenge where you write for 48 hours, no break.
Like you're not even allowed to sleep. You're just going for it.
You just go for 48 hours.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so Graham Greene, I'm gonna throw another one out at you. Okay. Graham Greene would have been mortified by that because he believed that much of the writing process occurred in the subconscious. So it was crucial to sleep on it, essentially, and then try to pick it out of your unconscious mind when you were up and about again.
That does make sense, because I was looking up, do you know, off the top of your head, the author of Picnic at Hanging Rock?
Oh, that's Joan Lindsay, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so that concept came to her in a dream, and it was so vivid that she had to get up and suddenly start writing it. So, maybe the 48 hours just staying up and writing doesn't make sense, especially if your ideas are coming from your dream or subconscious state.
Yeah, I think that there could be something in that. I mean, I always dream about really mundane things, so that wouldn't really be the fodder of great storytelling. Doing my taxes, walking to the shop. I suppose, I don't know, I think I do all my imagining when I'm awake, and then my subconscious brain is just like, whatever. Let's think about all these other chores you were supposed to do that you haven't done. I suspected something like that.
Yeah.
Graham Greene was a 500-word man as well. Although he took I suppose you'd call it a Catholic approach, driven as he was by guilt to do his writing. As soon as he got to the end of his 500 words, even if he was mid-scene, he'd be like, well, I don't need to do anymore. I've done my penance. And off he would go with the rest of his day. Even affairs, he said, even if he was in the midst of an affair, it would have to take place after lunch.
When you said it was like the Catholic perspective, I thought you meant he would have to have a rest on Sunday. Or would he?
No, he believed, and in fact, I think most of the writers that I've researched believed that you have to write every day, including Sundays. Yeah. But he was very much driven by something a bit like a confessional process where he had to atone for his non-writing sins, get that writing down, and then he'd be good to go. So there are a couple of examples of 500-word-a-day writers. How many would you say you write a day?
Well, maybe this is blasphemous because I'm not an everyday writer.
Oh, that is blasphemous.
I did a big writing day on Friday, and I wrote about 1,200 words.
Wow.
In the short story that I'm working on. But then yesterday, I busied myself with other stuff, including getting this podcast organized. I mean, we could even say we organized this podcast in 48 hours, and here we are. But I was too busy to do writing, but I'm hoping to do some today. So
I think, first of all, you're giving me way too much of the credit because I don't think I did any organizing at all. But thank you for that. I mean, I suppose you could achieve a lot in 48 hours in terms of things like the kind of, what is it called? The busy work around writing. And also reading, which is part of writing. You're going to hear me say that a lot over the course of this podcast, but reading is a form of writing and vice versa, which...
well, you could definitely finish a book in 48 hours.
Oh, gosh, yes. Particularly if it's a slim volume. Um, you absolutely could. I think there are certain books you couldn't finish in 48 hours. Like I've never been able to finish Ulysses by James Joyce. Um, I've been able to finish the first 22 pages, I think, 3 times within the space of an hour before giving up in horror and disgust at myself for not being able to get into it. Actually, so Joyce would be one end of our spectrum. Absolutely, he'd be one end of our spectrum. He was known for being absolutely constipated in his writing output. And Stephen
I've
King
just
actually.
got this pretty crazy imagery right now,
Oh yeah, no,
constipated with his
absolutely.
writing.
With his eye patch on, leaning over a table in despair. That I think that's very much the image I have of Joyce. But yeah, Stephen King wrote a book 20 years ago called On Writing, a memoir of the craft.
Yeah.
And he actually recounts an anecdote, which he says is probably not actually true, about James Joyce, where he's visited by a friend, and the friend comes in and sees him and says, "Oh, James, what's wrong? Is it the writing?" And Joyce says, "Well, of course it's the writing." And the friend says, "Well, how many words did you get in today?" And after a while, Joyce manages to murmur out 7. And the friend, being a good friend, says, "Oh, 7, but that James, that's really good for you." And Joyce replies, "Yeah, I suppose it is. I just don't know what order they go in."
Oh dear.
Yeah. So doesn't that make you feel better?
Well, yeah. And it would be pretty humorous if that friend that has just seen Joyce constipated over his table was Stephen King, because I did listen to On Writing, and he recommended doing 2,000 to 2,500 words a day. And then if he didn't write every day, he said the characters and the story becomes stale, and he feels like
Yeah,
an
and look, I
intruder.
mean, I'm not sure that too many people would say that Stephen King isn't like the first rank of fiction writers, but he is clearly an accomplished craftsman, and he's had a long career and he's produced a lot of very different work. So I think in terms of writing behaviors and writing routines, he's someone that you really should pay attention to, because he's got form. At the other end of the spectrum now, I'm going to give you the other end of the spectrum. I went looking around to see who the biggest output, and the award goes to Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park. I think he wrote the Andromeda Strain. I think that was Crichton. I haven't read any of his work, so I couldn't comment on it. But when he was interviewed in 1970 by the New York Times, he claimed that there were periods when he would write for 16 hours a day for a week or two, turning out roughly 10,000 words a day.
Wow. On a
So that's the
typewriter
other end
or
of
a
the spectrum,
pencil?
isn't it? I
Yeah.
don't know much more about it. I know that there's another quote from him from 86, where he says, "Books aren't written, they're rewritten, including your own. It's one of the hardest things to accept, especially after the 7th rewrite hasn't quite done it." So there's something in that for us, I think. And I've just got a lot of quotes here. Do you want another quote? I'll give you another one. This one from
Yeah,
Salman
sure.
Rushdie.
Oh,
Salman
yeah. Well,
Rushdie.
that's very on point at the moment, isn't it?
It is on point. It certainly is. About 6 years ago in the Harvard Business Review, he said that when he started out, he used to get a lot more written in a day than he did at that point. So he would write 4 to 5 pages. And currently he's doing about 400 or 500 words. But the difference, he said, is that the work he used to do needed a lot of revision, and now he writes much less, but it's closer to a finished piece.
Yeah.
So I think maybe, we could draw from that possibly the conclusion that writers can sometimes create a large body of text on a daily basis, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're writing any faster than someone who doesn't, because potentially their rewriting process could be a lot more labor intensive.
Yeah. Who is it, Irving, that says his only quality or skill or talent really was that he could just rewrite and rewrite continuously?
Yeah, John
John
Irving.
Irving. Yeah.
Yeah. And with his books, a lot of them are 800 to 900 pages. So that's a Herculean effort, isn't it? It's very impressive. These are all. I mean, it's a bit of a sausage fest in here. I did look up Margaret Atwood as well, and I got very drawn into her whole process. There was a lot about breakfast and coffee and various other things.
Oh,
And I've
doesn't that
actually
sound
forgotten the
charming?
word count she said, but I think it was somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 words.
2,000 words a day after a glorious breakfast and coffee.
Yeah, basically. I mean, like a lot of writers, her view is that you treat it like a job.
Yeah.
And probably rather than worrying about how many words you can produce in a day, probably a more manageable goal would be a number of hours writing every day.
Do you think you could do that? Because I know, I mean, we are doing other things at the moment. Is that practical?
Well, like a lot of things, it's practical in theory, but it becomes highly theoretical in practice. So yeah, no, I haven't really managed it. I think if I'm in a good frame, I'm for 2 hours a day, usually between about 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning before I have to run off to work and do other things. How many hours do you think you do a day on average?
Well, I do go down to the Friday writing day down at the Queensland Writers Centre here in Brisbane, and that goes for 6 hours. But I normally kind of am done by 2 to 3, and that starts at 10. So that would be 5 hours. A good day for me would be 3 to 4.
Okay. So when you go down to the Writers Centre, is that because you want the structure of going somewhere? Because one of the things I did read about Margaret Atwood is that she doesn't have a space. There's sort of she talked about the sort of fetishizing of the writing space, and the perfect quill pen you use to draft your masterpieces. And she said she's never had any of that. She can write anywhere, and that's what makes her more prolific.
Yeah.
But do you find changing the space allows you to achieve more or potentially less?
It's a good question, and I think the answer would be I get annoyed by everyone else in the room, so I have to work harder. And, like tip-tapping, people are very loud, they cough. So I have to work hard to drone them out. So it's just me and my laptop. And the days that I produce a lot of work is the days that I do successfully drone them out, and the days that I don't is when I don't. So it's a practice in removing the outside world. And that's probably, it's less about the space and more about the practice of removing everything else.
Okay. Yeah, there was a study done on that. I don't have it in front of me, but essentially it was a study to see how many decibels were ideal in terms of background noise, were ideal for creative processes.
Yeah.
I believe the number was 75 decibels, which is roughly what a relatively busy cafe sounds like. So I think that might be why writers are drawn to cafes and possibly to writing centers, because it's just enough of a constraint that you have to focus to get past it. And that's what keeps you focused, as opposed to having perfect silence and it's a blank page on into which you can stare forever.
Yeah. I think Stephen King said he listened to heavy metal when he was writing.
He did, and he also took a lot of cocaine, I recall him saying. So, potentially there's something in that.
Well, let's not promote like drugs on here, but he recently said that you don't need any substances to be a good writer.
Yeah. Well, I could imagine he would say that because, of course, he did promote that sort of narrative about himself quite a bit when he was younger.
Yeah.
Um, and I imagine if people are fans of his work, they might think this is the way forward for me. As a counterbalance, Coleridge, the poet Coleridge, said that he never achieved anything of any note in his high. Um, and that makes a lot more sense because how would you even know a lot of the time? So, yeah. So, how else would we, like, what other kinds of systems and structures could you put up in your life to generate more writing output?
Um, I think that depends on what you're like. So the people who do enjoy working to deadline or challenges, there are a few that would kind of help you produce that amount of work that we're talking about. So I did find one called Millwordy. That's where you write 1 million words in a year.
God,
And so you would have to average 3,000 words a day. But of course, this is the 48-hour challenge. That's 6,000 words in a weekend. The average manuscript is 60,000, 10 weeks to write your first draft. I mean, that's pretty impressive for a 48 system challenge,
wow,
48-hour
that
challenge.
is impressive.
Hmm. NaNoWriMo is another quite popular one where you produce 50,000 words in a month. So that's 1,667 words a day. And another challenge I found was a short story a day. So, I mean, if you wanted to create a collection of short stories, two on the weekend, how many would that be by the end? Almost just under 100. 104.
Good gracious, there's bound to be a few gems in amongst it too, you would think, wouldn't you? Just statistically, you'd hope so.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, someone who produced a collection of short story, the science fiction writer Harlan Ellison. So I have a little article here. He once pulled off a stunt to make the point that you don't need to wait for inspiration. At the close of NBC's Today Show in April 1981, interviewer Tom Brokaw held up an envelope containing a piece of paper which read, August afternoon, a person walking along a rocky beach in Maine picks up a pair of broken sunglasses. So the story is that at 9:45 a.m., Harlan Ellison climbed into a window of a Fifth Avenue bookstore, read Tom's words for the first time as the crowds looked on, and then began to write. 5 hours later, he produced The Night of Black Glass, and that is a short story featured in his 1982 collection titled Stalking the Nightmare. So, 5 hours, there's a short story.
That's really impressive. It's another constraint, though, isn't it? Like the noise at the writing center, and I
Having people watch you create a short story.
well, yeah, and the time limit, all that pressure. I mean, Dostoevsky wrote The Gambler in a month, and that was to pay off his gambling debts. So
Oh,
effectively, he owed a publisher a considerable sum of money. And so basically, he wagered the rights to all his works against this idea that he could produce a novel that obviously would make some money and help, pay off his future gambling debts. He could produce a novel in 30 days, and the publisher said, "Yeah, go on then." And he got it done. He got it done with hours to go, apparently. And the publisher basically tried to hide from him so that he'd win the wages. So Dostoevsky ran to the police station and got them to kind of sign off on it, like a JP kind of thing, to say that they'd received it and it was done. So yeah, he did that in 30 days. It's a novella, but it's considered a significant piece of work from him. That's quite impressive.
did you say that they were threatening to break his kneecaps or something at one stage?
No, I don't know that they would have done that. Although, to be honest with you, I was thinking it would be a great sideline for the mafia, wouldn't it? You could sort of hire yourself a mafia person, say, look, if I don't have this novel done by the end of the year, I need you to come over with a baseball bat and sort me out. And I feel like that would motivate you, wouldn't it? I mean, it would be
Yeah.
a certain constraint. And, you know, even just the worry.
But then talking about worry on the opposite end, some people don't handle pressure really well. I'm not sure if that system would work for you, Gareth.
Oh, no, I'm actually quite comfortable writing for reasons other than my own pleasure. So, for example, I mean, you know, I'll give you a great example of what I can produce in a short period of time. So back in about 10 years ago, I was given an editing job to edit a collection of fairy tales, 40 fairy tales. They were all public domain texts, which is a nice cheap way to approach it. But what the publisher wanted was they wanted all 40 to have the same writing voice and to be approximately the same length and the same tone and what have you. So it wasn't really an editing job, because some of these texts were hundreds of years old and others were not nearly so old. And they varied in length from about a page and a half to 40 pages in length. So it was very much an exercise in ghostwriting the classics. But there was a further complication, which is I was given 6 weeks to do this. However, for various reasons, the first 4 weeks, the manuscript did not arrive in my inbox, and the due date didn't change to accommodate that fact. So I was given 2 weeks to do the 40 stories. I did them in 9. I did them in 9 days.
Wow.
I was working 16 hours a day. And that collection is called, if anyone wants to go track it down, it's called The Fairy Tale Treasury, a classic collection of famous children's stories. It's from Murdoch Books in 2011. That was 240 pages published, because they only ended up using 20 of the stories. They just wanted to have some choices. So,
did you know that or not?
No, I didn't know that. I think I would have said, look, you've only given me 2 weeks. Can't I just do 20 of them?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know what my word count was, but I know as soon as I knocked off one, I'd be straight on to the next one. And some were much harder than others. But in any case, I used to write for publication as a living. And, you would have different time frames and jobs. And really, there was no flexibility around it. Like, things were due when they were due, and you just had to do them. And I know that when I used to do theatre reviews, you'd go to the show at, say, 8:00 at night, see the show, wine and dine with the cast and crew, and then stagger home, get up in the morning, and then you'd have to have the review researched, written, and edited, and to the publisher by 11 a.m. the next day. So with those kinds of things, I can write quite quickly. Not always well, but quickly.
So why does it not transfer over to your own creative work, do you think?
I think because my creative work, the work I'm currently doing, I'm doing for pleasure. So I'm writing at a speed that, well, I mean, obviously I'm not, work gets in the way. So that's obviously another thing altogether. But when I am able to write and I actually can squeeze the time in to sit down and actually do it, then for me, it is about the pleasure of the writing. Again, I think Salman Rushdie said something like that. Like he was indifferent to getting published. He just wanted to writing. When it's going well, when you find yourself inside the writing, it's magical and it's an exhilarating experience. He said something, I won't claim to know the exact words, but he said something like that. And I've found that to be the case as well. So it's not something I feel that, why would you rush something you're enjoying? I think it just takes the time it takes. I'm very sort of skeptical of daily word counts. I think the ideal is to set aside an achievable amount of time every day, no days off, but every day when you write. And it might be, I would think anything less than 2 hours is pushing it. At least it would be for me in terms of being able to settle myself and find my way in again and allow the imaginative process to sort of stretch out, get some stretches in before we try to hobble. So yeah, I would have said 2 hours would be a minimum. And if on a weekend I've got nothing else on, I'll happily write all day. Absolutely.
Okay, so definitely writing for the enjoyment and the pleasure. I'm just trying to consider whether, so we have, the big names like Margaret Atwood, Neil Gaiman, who's quite prolific now, definitely, especially with his Sandman. Do you think they still get pleasure now that it's a bit more of in a business setting now? They are well known, they have to keep producing for their publishers. It's a job. Is there still pleasure in the job?
I couldn't pretend to know, but certainly with like Margaret Atwood's one of my favorite writers. And one of the things that I adore about her writing and want to emulate in my own writing is the sense of joy you can see in her writing.
Yeah.
She's very in her writing. It doesn't strike me as self-conscious. And when she writes about writing also, it's wonderful. So I would think that somehow, I guess she could be faking it, but my sense is that she isn't. And so she's managed to maintain that pleasure, regardless of how prolific she is. And in fact, I don't think she would regard herself as especially prolific.
No, she says that it's just because she's been around for a very long time. She's old.
Yeah, that's probably right. And let's hope she sticks around for a lot longer and writes more books.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if I last long enough, I'll knock out 2 or 3. Yeah. Give me a few decades.
A few decades.
Yeah. Well, it's not a race. And I don't know, you look at someone like Harper Lee, she only wrote the one book. I know there was a posthumous release, but I don't know that I would consider that part of her canon exactly. And
What
I
was the name of
believe
the book?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh yeah, but that was released post Homelessly.
Oh, gosh, what is it? Is it Ghost Set a Watchman? Something like that. I never paid it much mind. I know that there was some talk that she may have been quite involved in writing of In Cold Blood, which is solely attributed to Truman Capote.
Oh yes, I think I have heard that.
But she was a slow writer and she wrote as much as she wanted to write, really. And what she has written has had an impact, which is really all you're trying for, I think, as a writer, is to have your stories do something to readers.
Yeah.
So yeah, how many times can you pull it off? Or in fact, how many times would you want to pull it off?
How many books has Lee Child written in the Ripper series? I think he was on to 27, 28.
Yeah, but I think his son writes his books now, or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
and I know
news.
James Patterson has a series of, I don't know, you wouldn't call them ghostwriters. They're more like child writers or something, new writers that come along and he contributes an idea and they go off and write it for him. So at that point, the name is the thing, isn't it? It's not the work.
Yeah.
It's a product. I don't mean to say that in any kind of offhand way, but I think it is actually just a product. But it's like people who talk about the idea that you have to have read certain books. Like I haven't read Ulysses. I just can't do it. I'll just admit it now, hand on my heart.
I think I've also tried to pick up Ulysses and read it, and I think I get up to 10 pages and like, okay, yeah, I get the deal. It's not for me.
Yeah, and that's just a primer for Finnegan's Wake, which apparently makes Ulysses seem like a golden book.
Oh.
Yeah, much harder piece of work. I think his wife said to him once, "Why can't you write anything people want to read?" I don't know if that's apocryphal. It sounds like the sort of thing your wife or husband would say to you, though, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah, I think so. But yeah, so I guess, I mean, what are we concluding from this in terms of a writing perspective? What should one expect to be able to achieve in 48 hours?
Well, given the name of the podcast is Pleasure of the Text, I think the number one would be pleasure. I mean, we do it because we enjoy it. I mean, if you're a sucker for punishment, writing is definitely up your alley because at times it is not fun, especially when you're editing and it's not your passion. But writing for me definitely is just having transported myself to a completely different place that is not my reality. And it's very fun. And I also get so much pleasure when I impact other people through my writing. So I suppose that is the number one takeaway for me. And really, when I heard this podcast, it's that, you know, I hear it a lot from other writers, and it's, I'm not inspired at the moment. And I think waiting around for inspiration is a mug's game. And I think, at some stage, you really do just need to put words to paper and, start producing something. But that's my take on it. What about yours?
Well, I agree, and you can basically go to a cafe and you'll find your inspiration simply by needing to focus past those 75 decibels. Georges Perec, he would create constraints for himself, really sort of arbitrary things. Like, he wrote a novel that did not include the letter E at any point. And that constraint, he said, actually freed up his creativity to the extent that he felt like the book almost wrote itself. So yeah, I mean, that's inspiration that was generated through technique. So
Yeah.
I agree. You've got to be a total mug just to sit around waiting for it to come. You've got to get out there and get dating, folks. Love won't just knock on your door. And I suppose the other side of it, besides pleasure, is text. You gotta generate some text. I don't think it actually matters how much text you generate, but you need that interplay between being there, being a writer, and having something that you're writing. And I say that very much in present tense because once something is written, at least for me, it's dead to me.
That's a bit extreme.
No, it's true. Well, because when you're reading books, you're in that moment of the book, and it's very similar to the moment you're in when you're writing. So somebody else comes along, and I find them more interesting than I find myself. And that sort of past self seems extremely redundant. Again, I think that might be. I think Rushdie said something along the lines, he knew that he'd finished writing a book when it didn't change, he just wrote it in different ways, something like that. And that idea of sort of a kind of an imaginative exhaustion. For me, I know when it's done, when I no longer care about it and just want to move on to something else. So,
Yeah.
and sometimes that could be somebody else's work. Like we obviously work together on our writing, and there are times when I just think, well, I just want to work with Shannon on her writing. I don't really want to have to deal with this stuff I'm doing. So it's become tedious. So yeah, you want to eat out at the restaurant rather than stay at home and cook your own steaks. Go somewhere else and experience writing in a different context. So yeah, pleasure and text. I think those are the things that you're trying to achieve in 48 hours, whatever shape that takes.
Yeah. And whether or not you think you'll benefit from having a 48-hour constraint or not, I mean, that's up for you to decide to produce that pleasure and to get the text on the page as well. So kind of next week we are doing our creative writing segment, and have you thought about much about what we're going to be doing for that week, Gareth?
Well, I think, I mean, to be 100% honest, no.
Okay.
But, that's okay because I'm inspired. I'm inspired by the process. And I think probably that can be our topic. Uh, getting
Inspiration.
inspired by the process, getting past writer's block, if writer's block actually exists. So yeah, I think that's what we'll do. We'll look at techniques for getting around writer's block and generating inspiration, being in control of your own inspiration.
Okay. And also after that, we are reviewing the Secret Rendezvous by Kobo Abe.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
excited.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited too. He's a funky writer. I like being in his imaginative space. It's a great
Yes.
place.
So you said that you've almost finished his other book?
Yeah, the ruined map, which I can't recommend highly enough. It's been absolutely fascinating, and like all great writing, it has changed my whole conception of lemon curtains, lemon colored curtains. I'll only ever think of the ruined map now when I see lemon colored curtains.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
Okay.
possibly lemon sherbet too. I could see this really bleeding out into my world.
Well, that's awesome. It's impacted you already, and I'm hoping this book impacts me as well. So I'll definitely put a link if you want to join us for the review, for if you want to go pick up the book from Book Depository. I'll put it in the show notes. And just closing, if you have enjoyed listening to Gareth and Shannon, like and subscribe to the podcast. And everything we have discussed today will be in the show notes over at our website. And anyone who wants to partake in the 48-hour challenge, send us an email and let us know what you got up to and what you achieved. And did it bring any pleasure to your writing experience? Let us know. And I think that's closing for us. Until next time. What do you say, Gareth?
Yeah, I think we're done. Over an hour.